On a quiet, cold February afternoon in Delphi, Indiana, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. This small town of about 3,000 people sits an hour outside Indianapolis, the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name and children walk familiar trails without a second thought. February 13th, 2017 began like any other day off from school. But by nightfall, this sleepy Midwestern community would be changed forever. Two best friends, 13-year-old Abigail Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German, set out for an afternoon hike along the Monon High Bridge Trail. They never came home. How could two young girls vanish in broad daylight, on a trail dozens of people walked every week? Why did it take more than 5 years before an arrest was finally made? And what role would a single cell phone recording play in cracking open one of the most closely watched investigations in modern American true crime? This is the story of Abby and Libby, who they were, what happened to them, and the long, painstaking road to justice that followed. Stay with us until the end, because this case holds twists that shocked investigators, stunned a nation, and are still being contested in court to this very day. Before we go further, it's important to remember that Abby Williams and Libby German were not simply names in a case file. They were 8th graders, best friends, and, by every account from those who loved them, full of life. Libby German was known for her warmth and her sense of humor. Friends and family described her as outgoing, fiercely loyal, and endlessly curious, the kind of teenager who made people laugh even on hard days. She loved spending time outdoors, and was close with her grandparents, Mike and Becky Patty, who helped raise her. Abby Williams was remembered as sweet, thoughtful, and deeply devoted to her family and friends. She and Libby had been inseparable for years, sharing sleepovers, inside jokes, and a bond that classmates said was obvious to anyone who saw them together. On February 13th, 2017, Indiana schools were closed for the day. With free time on their hands, the girls decided to visit the Monon High Bridge Trail just outside Delphi, a scenic, well-known local spot built around an old abandoned railroad trestle. It was a place they, and many other local families, had visited before. There was nothing about the outing that suggested danger. It was simply two friends, making the most of a day off. February 13th, 2017. That afternoon, a family member dropped Abby and Libby off near the trailhead so they could hike the Monon High Bridge and explore the area before being picked up later in the day. While on the trail, the girls took photos of the scenery and of each other, images that would later become some of the last documented moments of their lives. At some point during their walk, Libby used her phone to record a brief video. In it, a man can be seen walking on the bridge behind them, hands in his pockets. The recording also captured a muffled voice giving an instruction that would become chilling in hindsight. "Guys, down the hill." The girls were expected to meet a relative at a designated pickup spot later that afternoon. They never arrived. As the hours passed and evening set in, their families grew increasingly worried. When repeated calls and texts went unanswered, concern turned into alarm, and by that evening, Abby and Libby were reported missing. The search word spread quickly through the small community. Within hours, family members, neighbors, and local volunteers organized to search the trail and the surrounding wooded areas. Law enforcement joined the effort as night fell, working alongside civilian searchers in difficult, cold conditions. The search stretched through the night and into the following day, with searchers combing the dense woods near the trail and the banks of nearby Deer Creek. The community's fear and heartbreak were palpable. This was a town where everyone felt the weight of two missing children. On February 14th, 2017, searchers made the devastating discovery that every family and volunteer had been dreading. The bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German were found in a wooded area not far from the trail. We won't go into graphic detail here, out of respect for the girls and their families. What matters most is that a tight-knit community had lost two of its own, and the search for who did this, and why, was only just beginning. The investigation begins. What followed was one of the largest law enforcement responses in Indiana's history. The Indiana State Police took the lead, working alongside the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, and other local and federal agencies. Investigators processed the crime scene, canvassed the trail and surrounding areas, and began collecting evidence that would shape the case for years to come. At the center of the investigation was the video and audio Libby had recorded on her phone, the man walking on the bridge, and that haunting fragment of audio, "Guys." Down the hill, investigators became convinced this man was directly connected to the girls' deaths, and just days after the murders, police released the recording and a still image to the public, hoping someone would recognize him. He became known across the country simply as Bridge Guy. The release of that footage triggered an enormous public response. Tip lines were flooded, news outlets across the country picked up the story, and true crime communities online began dissecting every frame of the video. For investigators, the challenge was clear. They had a face, a voice, and a location, but no name. Years of mystery. In the years that followed, the case became one of the most talked about unsolved mysteries in the country. Investigators say they received tens of thousands of tips from the public, each one requiring time and resources to evaluate. Multiple press conferences were held over the years as police tried to keep the case in the public eye and encourage new information. At one point, investigators released an updated sketch of the suspect, hoping a fresh depiction might jog someone's memory. Online, amateur sleuths and true crime podcasters debated countless theories, some grounded in released evidence, many purely speculative. It's important to distinguish between the two. While the Bridge Guy video and audio were confirmed pieces of evidence, most of the theories that circulated publicly during this period were never substantiated by investigators, and many were later shown to be dead ends. Why did the case stay cold for so long? Part of the answer, investigators would later reveal, was a piece of information that had been overlooked. Just days after the murders, a man had approached a conservation officer near the trail and volunteered that he had been hiking there that day and had passed 3 girls along the way. That report was filed, but according to testimony from Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett, it went unnoticed for years, lost among the sheer volume of tips and paperwork the case had generated. That man's name was Richard Allen. The arrest. For more than 5 years, Richard Allen lived an unassuming life in Delphi, working as a pharmacy technician at the local CVS, just blocks from the courthouse where he would eventually stand trial. According to investigators, he had, in effect, been hiding in plain sight. The break in the case came in 2022, when a volunteer clerk helping police digitize years of old tips came across the long-overlooked report of Allen's own account of being on the trail that day. That discovery led investigators to take a fresh look at Allen. In October 2022, more than 5 years after the murders, Richard Allen was arrested and charged in connection with the deaths of Abby Williams and Libby German. It's important to state clearly, an arrest is not a conviction. At the time charges were filed, these were allegations that Allen would have the opportunity to contest in court, and the justice system requires that guilt be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Allen's arrest sent shockwaves through Delphi and around the country, reigniting massive public interest in a case that had gone quiet for years. His case would go on to face significant delays, including a leak of evidence, the temporary withdrawal of his public defenders, and their eventual reinstatement by the Indiana Supreme Court, before finally reaching trial 2 years later. Court proceedings. Richard Allen's trial began with jury selection in October 2024, with a jury ultimately sequestered from Allen County, brought in to hear the case in Delphi. Over more than 2 weeks of testimony, prosecutors built their case around several key pieces of evidence. Central to the prosecution's argument was an unspent .40 caliber round found near where the girls' bodies were discovered. Investigators testified that ballistic analysis linked that round to having been cycled through a Sig Sauer pistol owned by Allen. Prosecutors also presented what they described as numerous confessions Allen made while incarcerated awaiting trial, statements made, according to testimony, to his wife, his mother, a prison psychologist, and others. The defense, for its part, argued that no physical evidence such as DNA or fingerprints tied Allen directly to the crime scene, and that no witness could specifically identify him as the man seen in the Bridge Guy video. Allen's attorneys also argued that his confessions came while he was in a fragile mental state during solitary confinement and should not have been considered reliable. At one point, the defense sought to introduce an alternative theory involving a fringe group, though the judge ultimately did not allow this theory to be presented to the jury. After roughly 19 hours of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict on November 11, 2024, guilty on all 4 counts, including murder and felony murder in the deaths of both girls. In December 2024, Judge Fran Gull sentenced Richard Allen to the maximum allowed under the law, 65 years on each of 2 murder counts, served consecutively, for a total of 130 years in prison. It's worth noting, in the interest of full accuracy, that Allen has continued to maintain his innocence, and his legal team has since filed an appeal with the Indiana Court of Appeals. As of this recording, that appeal remains pending, with oral arguments scheduled before the court. This is an important reminder that, in the American legal system, a conviction can remain under review even after a verdict and sentencing. The Delphi murders left a permanent mark on this small Indiana town. For nearly 8 years, the community lived with the unanswered question of who had taken Abby and Libby from them, and the case's eventual resolution brought a measure of closure, even as some family members have said no verdict could ever truly heal what was lost. Beyond Delphi, this case reshaped conversations about digital evidence in criminal investigations. The video and audio recorded on a teenager's cell phone became one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the case, demonstrating just how powerful smartphone technology can be in preserving crucial moments, sometimes without the person even realizing what they've captured. Investigators have also pointed to the case as an example of how tip lines and public information, when properly organized and reviewed, can eventually break open even the coldest of cases. The case also drew attention to the challenges investigators face when managing enormous volumes of public tips, and how easily a critical piece of information can be overlooked amid the sheer scale of a high-profile investigation. It's a sobering reminder of both the strengths and the limitations of large-scale police work. In the end, this case will likely be remembered for 2 things: the extraordinary role a single cell phone recording played in identifying a suspect, and the extraordinary patience and heartbreak endured by 2 families who waited nearly 8 years for answers. Investigators pursued thousands of leads over the years, often without any indication that a resolution was near, and through it all, the families of Abby Williams and Libby German carried a grief that never fully left them, even as they continued to advocate publicly for their daughters and granddaughters. This case continues to be discussed, debated, and followed closely, not only because of its investigative twists, but because of what it represents: the fragility of safety in everyday moments, and the lengths a community will go to seek the truth. If you found this documentary informative, please like this video, subscribe for more carefully researched true crime documentaries, and share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Above all, let us remember Abigail Williams and Liberty German, not for the tragedy that took their lives, but for the lives they lived and the memories they left behind. Be sure to check out our other crime videos, and stay tuned. We'll see you in the next one.